Hello everyone, welcome back to another one of my videos, and today we're going to be reading Reddit stories, and not just any Reddit stories, we're going to be reading paranormal Reddit stories on r/ghoststories. Anything that catches my eye, we're just going to read and find some crazy stories, and hopefully you guys enjoy. Let's get into it. Honestly, the first one caught my eye very fast just because it says San Bernardino. So anything that has to do with the IE or something close to where I'm at brings my interest super immediately. So I think that's going to be the first story we're going to read. And it was just posted 1 hour ago. So let's get into it. Once I worked for an ambulance company. Oh, I shouldn't have read something. I should have just reacted to something. Once I worked for an ambulance company and we were leaving St. Bernardine's Hospital in the city of San Bernardino around 2 in the morning. Traveling northbound on Waterman, we had just crossed over Highland passing the cemetery north of the hospital when I noticed someone crossing the street ahead of me in the dark, making their way towards the cemetery. My partner voices over at me, "Look out, somebody's crossing," and I acknowledge them, seeing the person. But as our headlights got closer to this individual, they vanished in thin air. Being the driver, I came to a complete stop in the middle of Waterman and looked over at my partner. "You saw that, right?" And he goes, "That's why I tried telling you to slow down." I turned the ambulance floodlights on the left, homes, I guess they're called homes, to the right, cemetery. Oh, there's homes on the left and the cemeteries on the right, but nobody to be seen. We just shrugged it off and left. Either it was a ghost making his way back to its grave, or a homeless man. It's a possibility. That one, it's a bit spooky, but in San Bernardino, it's so common to see jaywalkers everywhere. It doesn't matter if you're going fast, slow, they will just go in front of your car no matter what. So it's possible that they saw something, but I'm a bit iffy on this one, so who knows. Next story. Another one that's caught my eye so far is this one by Do Appointment 9539. It was 13 hours ago he posted. There's something that stands outside of my door at night. I have to read this one. It's spooky. Oh, I thought it was gonna be a longer story. Alright. So this is how it goes. There's something that stands outside of my door at night. So my first experience with ghosts happened 2 years ago. During the summer, I would stay up all night playing video games and not sleep till 7 in the morning. But one night, I was like, I'm going to sleep early this time. So I turn off my PS4, my light, and I hop into bed. Not even 5 minutes after I got in bed, I hear something whisper in my ear, "Wake up." I got my ass out of bed and played my game until I see the sunlight. Now I present my door has opened all the way and slammed shut twice. One time, my cousin was sleeping over and it happened, so I drew some rudimentary Viking protection runes. And it hasn't happened since. Then it worked. I was about to say Viking ruins is a bit crazy, but if it worked, it worked. Recently, I can hear footsteps coming down the hall. They stop right in front of my door, and I can feel whatever it is standing there, and it feels angry. I can tell it wants to get in, and I can literally feel the heat of its anger while I'm in my bed. I know it's not my mom or my grandfather who recently passed. Somebody said, "Tell it to fuck off and it should go away." Another comment I seen. In my experience, they get worse if you offer them fear. Just let them know to go away. Do your best to not feel anything more than amused or annoyed. Roll over and go to sleep. I think they often can't cross the barrier. Also, you have a body and they don't. That is spooky. I can't imagine. That's such a terrible feeling to have that somebody is looking at you, but you know that there's nobody there. Is such a terrible feeling. That's the best way I could put it. It's dread. Dread is the best word I can give, actually. No, dictionary. Damn. Never mind. You know what? The best thing I could say is get your house blessed, because that's terrifying. But on to the next story. So I filtered out. So what I did, I filtered out and I put top stories of all time. And the first one sounds crazy. The White Witch by Christian is Lost 72. And it was posted 4 years ago. So we have to read this one. Ooh, it's a big in. Alright, perfect. Let's get into it. In the early 80s, I lived in Okinawa, Japan. My dad thought that seeing the world would be an adventure that would help my brother and I become better men, and I have to say, I think he was right. Being in the military showed me cultures many would never get to experience, and I am thankful for every experience that the life gave to me, even the scary ones. While we lived in Japan, my father wanted us to have a fully immersive experience, so he chose to move into a small Japanese neighborhood off base. We lived in a little house at the top of an enormous hill in a cul-de-sac that overlooked, I kid you not, part of a huge zoo, and on one side a fairly huge cemetery. One particular house was set far above the monkey habitats above a mile downhill. Between us and those habitats was nothing but thick Indiana Jones style jungle. Both the neighborhood's kids and would tromp through endlessly, ignoring the local warnings about poisonous snakes and ancient untripped mines from World War II. Oof! We were the only American family living in the cul-de-sac, completely surrounded by Japanese families, and it was amazing. The kids loved us, and although we wouldn't communicate through language very well, we understood each other perfectly. Well, most of the time. Opposite us was an older couple with a lush garden surrounding their property. The older woman wanted us to call her Mama-san, and she had us helping her garden whenever she could coax us over with green tea and chocolate banana cookies. We loved her. She was so welcoming and generous, as was everyone else. Actually, we lived in a wonderful neighborhood. The only drawback to Mama-san's home, however, was she directly overlooked the cemetery, and the cemetery was unlike any cemetery I have ever seen before. Because Okinawa is an island, burials don't happen very often. Instead, above-ground crypts are built, many of them built into the sides of the hills that make up the island. The crypts are large, made of huge arcs of polished stone set over large squares of the stone, which has a square insert cut into the middle of it for the coffin to be placed in. Once inside, the square is inset with another piece of polished stone just inside, leaving a kind of shelf on the outside so offerings could be made to the lost loved ones. Yen, food, flowers, incense are some of the offerings given. Below Mama-san's house was a valley that swooped back up into another hill opposite her home. That valley and both hills were covered with these crypts, and spiderwebbing up and down through these crypts were various stone step pathways that were old and badly maintained. It was quite a sight. One evening, Mama-san asked me to come visit with her alone. She had something to show me, but it was only for me. As the older brother, intrigued and a bit proud, I agreed. She took me to the back garden and sat me on a thick wooden bench that was carved with the scenes of a fisherman and men with swords, and told me she had a story to tell. Mama-san then disappeared for a few minutes and soon returned with a tray held hot green tea and sweet rice cakes. Sitting next to me, she smiled and commented on the colors of the evening sky as the sun began to lower. Mama-san said she had seen me, my brother, and some other kids daring each other to follow some stairway path down into the cemetery. You have to understand, the path from our little home area down into the cemetery consisted of hundreds of steps, many broken or cracking, in and out of bushes and in steep inclines. It would be dangerous for anyone, but the real test was seeing how long we could take walking through the crypts at night. Mama-san wanted to explain why that was a bad idea. Many years ago during the war, Americans were thought to be devils, monsters that would murder innocent citizens for no reason other than to kill. The fear was the product of wartime propaganda used to encourage young men to military service and farmers to fight alongside them. But many didn't. Many ran. And with nowhere to hide, hundreds of Japanese citizens hurled themselves off the cliffside rather than face torture at the hands of their perceived enemy. I was terrified at hearing this. I had no idea this had happened. I was mortified and hit with such sadness. I started to cry. The sun was setting and the sky went from pink and blue to a deep orange and red. Mama-san reached out and held my hand, telling me not to worry. This was in the past, and the past is something we must always remember so we never go back. She went on with her story. One young woman had followed me through this sacrifice with her 2 children, but she had survived the fall. She was in a coma for months. When she did regain consciousness, she was horrified to realize she was not with her children. They had been buried somewhere in the cemetery below in an unmarked crypt that had many others. The woman would spend days and nights searching the cemetery, crying in pain, the torment of her loss unbearable, until the day she threw herself into the ocean to hopefully be reunited with her lost family. But they say she never found her children. Her act of suicide doomed her to purgatory. She would remain tortured for eternity. The sun had disappeared, the cemetery drowned in inky blackness. The main path dotted with dim broken lights feebly illuminating small areas. Mama-san continued. She still wanders the cemetery, she said, looking for her kids. You can hear her crying. And then she pointed down. I didn't want to, but I did. I looked. In the back of the cemetery, in the darkness, there was a white figure. At first a bright white shimmer, moving slowly, kind of shaking. It moved from side to side, was moving among the crypts, and you could actually hear the crying. Softly at first, but then low moans and whimpers of pain as it got closer. I was terrified. I wanted to run, but Mama-san held my hand and whispered, and she wouldn't come up here. We were too far. But that is why we shouldn't go down there after dark. She said many don't know her story and call her the White Witch, which angers her. It's best to stay away. It's best to pray for her. Mama-san says she comes out to see her often, hoping one day she will find her salvation. Needless to say, I never wanted to go down to the cemetery, not once, and I never sat back there with Mama-san again neither. That was enough for me. I did, however, visit Suicide Hill. It's called Peace Prayer Park now, out of respect. I cried the whole time we were there. I prayed for all the souls and for forgiveness. So many Japanese citizens spoke to us, welcoming us, telling us stories, sharing with us. I didn't feel worthy, and my love for the country and its people, it was overwhelming. I'll never forget my time there. I'd like to go back to see if she's still there, wandering the graves looking for her children. Man, that is a good story. This story was honestly very good, and it reminded me a lot of La Llorona. I wouldn't say a lot, just the aspect of the crying for her kids and the white lady. If you guys don't know the story of La Llorona, I'm gonna give you a small piece of it because it's a good amount of a story. But overall, she offed her kids out of spite and rage and jealousy, instantly regrets it, and does the same to herself. And she ends up becoming a restless spirit that looks for her kids. And this is an old wise tale, but to some, it's not. If you guys want to see a video of La Llorona, like a history of La Llorona, I would love to make that video. If you do, put it in the comments below. I would love to do that for you guys. But only if you want it. Maybe I'll just make it. I don't care. But anyways, she said to take your kids, and this is used to scare a lot of kids in a lot of Hispanic households. But so this kind of reminded me of that, but of the crying and walking in the dark with the white dress. But not only that, this story is just overall strong, very impactful, and I hope I did justice reading it. Not reading it, but being able to read it in the way, the emotion it was giving off. It's insane to think about, as World War II is just one big book. We get it read to us about what has happened, but we don't get little stories like this from the everyday people. And I think that hearing stories like this really just brings it, I wouldn't say make a reality, but more along the lines of you feel more, it makes it more human. That's the best way I can describe it. But it was a very strong story, and dang, I'm a bit speechless on it. But I think we head to the next story, and hopefully the next story is as good as this, because that was a really good one. So on to the next. All right, so this one has caught my eye a little bit. My dead sister ratted me out to my mom, or ma'am. It was posted by I've Gone Identity Mad 4 years ago. We gotta read this one. Well, it's a short one, so let's see if it compares to the last story. Literally what it says. My older sister passed away at 5 years old, a year before I came along. My mom is super connected to her still to this day, and I have quite a few stories from her I could share. This one makes me laugh now though. In my 20s I started smoking. My mom is very anti-drugs, so I only smoked when she was away. A few days after returning from the night away, she cornered me in the kitchen and she told me she had a dream about Tina, the big sis. Tina told her I was smoking wacky backy, yup, in this dream, and she wanted to ask if it was true. I convinced her it was just a weird dream and absolutely was not. Sorry, Mom. And we moved on. 3 days later, my mom came bursting into my room at 4 in the morning, shouting at me that I was lying to her. Tina had come back to her and told her I was lying and that I am. I had to get up for work at 5, so I got up and made tea because she was really angry, so I confessed all. She went back to bed annoyed at me for making her doubt my sister. So yeah, my dead sister rats me out to my parents. Overall, that story was in a weird way sweet kind of story. It's screw your sister. No, I'm just kidding. That's honestly in a way cool. It just means your sister's with you and she loves you and she just cares for you. I couldn't imagine just my mom barging into me. Oh, your auntie said that you were doing this. Is it true? I would be just in awe. But that's a fun little story. Somebody put, so you still have to put up with the bitchy sister ratting you out even in the afterlife? Oh god, that's my future scuppered. I feel like the story was written, or because just the way that people are typing. I think that's what it says, ma'am, mum, or I don't know. Alright. Anyways, this story was a fun read, and does it match up to the other one? No. But hopefully we can find another good one. Not saying this one wasn't good, but it was a quick little story that was nice and sweet. And your big sister's watching out for you. So that's a cool thing. Next story. The next story we're going to be reading that caught my eye was by a creator by the name of Wolf_Dream. This was posted 4 years ago, but it says, "My trip to the slaughter yard, a story my mom wouldn't tell me until my 30s. Long." So, I don't like a slaughter yard. I'm thinking a slaughter yard is for animals. Yeah. I'm gonna go with animals. Alright, let's get to it. I just had a little brain fart moment right there. So let me start out by saying I enjoy writing, so this will be long. It is non-fiction though, but will hopefully be an interesting read. I also admit that I have absolutely no memory of this experience. I was a little over 2 years old and just started to walk on my own when this event took place. My mom only told me this story around 3 years ago, when I was 32 and about to get married. My mother was raised in a very tiny fundamentalist Christian community and had no belief in the paranormal. She believed that our souls sleep until Judgment Day or something like this. Ergo, there are no ghosts or spirits to haunt houses. Even over 30 years later, she still sounded terrified as she told me this. This woman, who always talks way too loud, was literally whispering by the end of it, and she was white as a sheet. I believed her completely, and still do. My mom never talks about stuff like this. I'm just glad I can remember it. I believed her completely and still do. My mom never talks about stuff like this. I'm just glad I can't remember it too. In 1988, my parents had their second child. This was my brother Victor. It's an alias. We were very crowded in our rented flat with 2 babies. My parents decided to move to a rambling, old 2-story farmhouse on a 7-acre plot in southern Ohio for more room for the family. It was way out in the sticks and took almost an hour to get to town from there. My mom said for the first time I saw the house, I freaked out. I was crying and saying things like, "Don't like, mean house, don't like. Scary house, mama, don't like." My mom says this behavior was very out of character for me, but I stopped complaining about the house after a few weeks. So she chalked it up for the stress of the move. Now this house was ramshackle as fuck and in the middle of nowhere. The kitchen was to the far rear of the house, and until recently before we moved in, still had working ancient wood-burning cooking stove against the back wall. This had caught in the wall back on fire in a couple of months before we moved in and caused a lot of damage. A lot of this damage wasn't fixed, so my young, broke parents got a very cheap agreement. Gotta love the 80s. On the second floor directly above the kitchen was a locked room. The landlord claimed it had heavy fire damage, but her son, who had done the repairs, claimed the only fire damage left was in the kitchen since it was been the worst and it was beyond his skill level to fix. Either way, the landlord was adamant that the room was off limits and my parents always respected that. I would have looked 100% lol. I know all this because I heard stories about the crappy farmhouse with creepy door my whole life, and there were pictures of us in and around the farmhouse. The locked door was right next to the upstairs landing, so there was no avoiding it, and both my parents have told me it gave them the creeps. A few months after we moved in, my mother and I were in the yard with our pit Doberman mix. She was hanging laundry and rolling around with the dog. She just said she had noticed that everything was way too silent. Boss started going apeshit from surprisingly far away. About 500 yards from the house on the left, there was a small duck pond. Boss was in between the two, running towards my mom, then turning and running back towards the pond, barking frantically the whole time. My mom saw something thrashing in the water around the middle of the pond. She took off towards the water full speed. Boss beat her there and dragged me out of the water himself. Thank you, Pupper. Love you. Although my mom was confused how I got so far so fast and how I got into the center of the pond since it was over my head and I couldn't swim. She figured she underestimated me and brought in the baby gates and playpens. I was to be contained from now on. A few weeks later, she was cooking downstairs. Boss was outside, Victor asleep in his crib, and I was in the playpen in my room upstairs. I also had a gate on my door and one at the top of the stairs. The stairs ran up from the side of the kitchen, so my mom said she could listen for us crying or fussing while cooking. My mom said no longer than 15 minutes after the last time she looked at us on us kids, Boss started going crazy again in the yard. She runs up to check on us, Victor's still sleeping, every baby gate is still shut and locked, but I'm not in my room. A frenzied search reveals I'm not in the house at all. A sudden image of Boss saving me from drowning causes my mom to rush outside to see what he's trying to tell her this time. She said he was running circles in the yard, barking uncontrollably. When she got outside, he took off towards the right, away from the pond. He would run ahead, turn around, and bark at my mother, waiting for her to catch up a little before racing off again. He ended up leading her almost a mile and a half onto a dirt road that separated our property from our neighbors. He led her to a thick stand of trees on our neighbor's side of the rocky drive. She said what hit her first was the foul stench of advanced decay. She plowed into the trees with her throat and stomach full of ice. She said she noticed many piles of corrugated tins, tarps, tires, and other debris. The miasma was emanating most strongly from these junkyard cairns. Peeking under a sheet of tin, she discovered the extremely decomposed corpse of a butchered cow. As she headed deeper into the thicket, where the tree cover was denser, she said less care was taken to cover the remains. Grisly pieces of bones and rotting chunks of bovine littered the area. Apparently, our neighbor, in an effort to cheat his taxes, he had illegally slaughtering cattle and hiding the remains in at least one of the few thickest stands of the trees around. Jeez Louise. She found me in the dead center of this thicket, just standing there looking around like I was confused, surrounded by carnage. She said I didn't seem scared or anything, just standing. She rushed over to me and after ascertaining that I wasn't injured, began questioning me and why I was here, how I got there, etc. Keep in mind that although my mother said I started speaking very young, I still didn't have much of a vocabulary. She said that I told her with that serious look only small children can give, that the children brought me here. Shatting her pants of the thought that anyone, even children, could walk right past her through the kitchen, get me from upstairs and walk right back past her on the way down the stairs and out with me, she demanded to know where the children were at and where the hell they are now. I looked at her dead serious and told her the ones that live with us in the room at the top of the stairs and that I didn't see them anymore. Oh Lord. After a moment of stunned silence, she started asking all kinds of questions about these children. However, she told me that I refused to say anything else. She said as long as she questioned me about what happened, I would just stand there staring at her with a serious expression and my mouth closed. She said the same pattern held true every other time she brought it up to me. She was always left wondering and immediately began hounding my dad about moving closer to town. While the incident with me getting to the pond was highly unlikely, it was at least remotely possible. My mother is adamant that me being in the hidden slaughter yard that day was flat impossible. She says there's no way I could have even known I was out there, much less have the ability to open and relock the baby gates, get downstairs, past her, and almost end up 2 miles down the road in one place in under 15 minutes. I was only 2 and as slow as clumsy as most toddlers. As I said, she is still shaken up by it after 30 years. Personally, I have no idea what happened that day. I thought about hypnosis, but haven't yet decided I really want to remember. Maybe it's better to let it be mystery because whatever the fuck those things were, I really don't think they were children. What a story. It was a long story, but that was almost as good as the White Witch story. For him being 2 years old and ending up almost 2 miles away is insane to me. Babies are clumsy. And if I'm not wrong, she said he was upstairs. He had to unlock the baby gates, go all the way downstairs, past his mom, and walk. And even passing the dog would have noticed that ASAP because that dog saved your life so many times and you didn't even say thank you. Oh, you did, but not for the second time. What a loyal dog. That's insane. They say a lot of dogs can see a lot of paranormal stuff, and I think it's true. They can see stuff that we can't, and he saved you. What a story. Some people said, let's see what they said. Great story. I would do hypnosis just because I'd drive me crazy the thought. What things did you see? Well, there's a response. Thank you. Where it was so deep in the country and the entities were apparently small since I called them children. It sounds crazy, but I'm worried they were some kind of nature spirits, trolls, goblins, or elves. Maybe not even these things exactly, but something similar to them. Especially since elementals like this have an ancient reputation for abducting children. I feel like they could have looked quite terrifying, but honestly, I do want to try to find out. Once I get back on my feet after this whole lockdown situation, I'm planning on finding a reputable, Jesus, reputable hypnotherapist because it drives me crazy not knowing. To be honest, this is another person by the way. To be honest, I think there were children for some reason. When you told her your story, I was thinking that it had to be kids that died in the fire that got stuck in that room and perished. Possibly even children with strong connections to the owners of the farm. If not their children, it could possibly have been a jealous of you or your young life. Even question why you even got to live and they had to die. Very creepy indeed. Did your mother ever open the door? Did you guys ever find the mystery behind the door? I'm willing to bet your experience would lead to all the way back to that door. No one, this is back to the actual OP, I think, original publisher, I think. No one died in the fire, but I don't know any history of any previous tenants, only that the house was pushing 200 years old, so goodness knows what happened in its past. I do know it was once a dairy farm and a tobacco plantation type place. Also, the Ohio River Valley area where this occurred was an important and populous area for the indigenous people of America. There are many mounds in the region, including the Great Serpent Mound, which is the largest surviving ancient earthwork in North America. So the general area was perceived in a sacred and spiritual light by its early inhabitants. My mom admitted she tried to get into the room, but she wasn't able to. My dad was mad when he found out because he didn't want to get evicted, so I was left alone after that. Still, no idea what was in there. My mom definitely agrees with you. She wasn't a paranormal believer, but freely admits that doors scared the crap out of her anyway. She said it made her skin crawl every time she went past it. Man. Okay, that was a good story. I think, honestly, we have time for, I think, one more story, and hopefully it could be the finale. And, like, good finale, I should say. Alright. I think I found one exactly. So the next story that we're going to be reading is by Film Guerrilla. Film Gorilla. Jesus. It was posted 4 years ago, so 2020 as well. It is called A Terrifying Encounter While in Iraq. Let's begin. Let me push on my glasses. Let me sit up straight, because this is the finale. I was a sergeant in the U.S. Army and ETSing, getting out from the military when President Bush ordered more troops into Iraq in 2003. I had just returned home to Austin, Texas when I was summoned into my local National Guard unit at Camp Mabry and told that I was being recalled to the Army. But the unit was already tasked out to deploy to Iraq. I was not part of their unit yet, so the commander offered to give me a waiver to deploy with the government contractor, Halliburton, in Houston. I knew that I would make more money as a contractor, so I took the offer. Not long after arriving in Kuwait at Camp Doha, I began working at the operations team overseeing logistic affairs. We would oversee the daily convoy of supply between Kuwait and Baghdad, a route riddled with IED incidents, small arms skirmishes, and almost constant breakdowns of army and civilian vehicles. Because I was a saw gunner in the 1st Infantry Division while in active duty, and was technically still in the Guard, I was often in the convoys manning a mounted weapon that accompanied the most civilian convoys. During these runs, we had a few strange encounters in the area south of Baghdad, known then as Camp Babylon. Occupied by French troops, but then designated an archaeological site for obvious reasons, Camp Babylon was set up in the area that's said to originally be inhabited by the famous Tower of Babel. Indeed, there were ruins there that did look like a massive structure once stood at the spot. I had 2 strange incidents happen to me while I was passing through there. At first, the first incident seems a bit benign, but sets the mood for the second. We were passing through Camp Babylon in the afternoon one day when the convoy took small arms fire. The SOP at the time, standard operating procedure, was to stop the convoy and return fire. This was because in the past, such incidents ended up being a long gunman attempting to scare the convoy into running into IEDs on the road. Because of this, the SOP changed to stop the convoy, dismount, and return fire. While engineers looked for explosive devices on the road, we scanned the horizon for enemy. The most likely fled immediately. However, the ruins around Camp Babylon were alive with shadow figures. They seemed to move about the area. Several times we would spot the figures, but they would immediately disappear. A contractor lying beside me with his weapon commented, "How odd that we are in the Shadow Babylon fighting the supernatural." I didn't respond, but I knew he was in the 32nd degree Mason who was really into the arcane aspects of Babylon, etc. I didn't feel at the time that much was supernatural, but certainly did see the shadowy and bizarrely small figures dart around the structures. Once the road was deemed clear, we continued to Baghdad. The second incident occurred about a month later. At this point, the weather in southern Iraq and Kuwait had turned quite cold at night. During this encounter, we had just completed the supply run to Baghdad and we were returning back to camp to Doha in Kuwait when a vehicle in our convoy broke down. Once again, we found ourselves right at Camp Babylon while the army mechanics took a look at our vehicle. And the rest of us took up fighting positions around the area. Strange things began to occur. It started with a strange light bobbling in the desert. Thinking it was a person with a flashlight, we used NVG's, night vision goggles, to watch. It was simply a glowing ball of light moving towards a set of ruins. After our initial contact with the light, a few of us had moved forward away from the convoy to see what the source was. After seeing it was a self-contained and not a person, we were a bit alarmed. Then we heard a sound that we will never forget. A long wailing began from one of the ruined structure's foundations not far away. It sounded like a woman in agony, mixed with loneliness. On and on the sounds went while we huddled in the cold and dark, wondering what the hell we were listening to. With our NVGs equipped, we used our flashlight to spotlight the ruins. If you ever done this, you will know that the normal flashlight with NVGs looks like a massive beam of light. We scoured the area, but no source of the walls or the ball of light were seen. About this time, we were told via radio that the vehicle was repaired and ready to roll, so we decided to return to the convoy. I was slinging my saw over my shoulder when I noticed my contractor partner was staring at the ruins in horror. He was frozen. I shook him and he snapped out of the stupor, quickly leaving the area with the rest of us. Once we were back at the camp and it was pleasantly daylight the following morning, several of us were chatting about the encounter of Camp Babylon before our daily operations briefing. It was then that I remembered that the expression on the face of the contractor, so I asked him about it. He was still obviously traumatized by the event, but managed to explain that as we were leaving our position on the sandy hill, he saw a tall, black figure standing beside the ruins. It was watching us as we were looking for him, her, it. He said that it felt an instant wave of despair hit him and thought he was going to die. He didn't remember leaving the area. His next memory was in the Humvee heading back to Kuwait. I now write non-fiction books about haunted places from Llewellyn Publishing and visited hundreds of reputable haunted spots. But I'll never forget the wailing figure at the ruins of Babel. It was also worth noting that when I related this story to some of our Pakistani employees at Camp Doha and Camp Arafin, they were quite horrified. One of them, a translator we called Ardi, said that we had encountered a jinn, or a damned spirit, and that we were lucky to be able to tell the tale. And I agree. Dude, I think that was a good one to end on. Holy. Alright. That was a really good one to end on, but before we end, I can't imagine just coming from an army man. Those men are some of the strongest sons of guns ever. Like, they're tough-headed. When you hear something come from an army man, you respect their word. That's what I'm trying to convey. So this coming from somebody in Iraq, it's scary. I didn't know that the Tower Babel, not that it was, I'm not saying it wasn't real, but I'm just saying I didn't know there was a specific location in Iraq that they had ruins that it's possible that the Tower Babel was there. I didn't know that. That's really cool. If I have pictures, obviously I'll try to put some pictures up, but that's a really cool thing. But to experience something so dark there is insane. I kind of want to read. I really like the idea of military ghost stories or military paranormal stories. So if you guys want to see military ghost stories or military paranormal, anything along the lines of that, I would love to film that. I would love to read stories like that and hopefully be able to bring them to life, or just spread them so that people can listen to these stories that most people don't even go on Reddit and read. So if you want that, comment military stories or La Llorona if you want to hear the history of La Llorona, and I will make that video as well. But that was a really good story to end on. This is perfect for it. I appreciate everyone who sticked around to the end of this video. I hope to be able to create more styles of videos like this where it's just something that you could turn on and listen to. It's something you could put on while you're driving, working, cleaning, anything really. But if you guys like this style of content, please leave a comment. That if you do, put a like on the video, share this video. If you find any of the stories interesting, put a comment below. I would love to hear you guys. I read the comments. I would love to hear your feedback. And if you guys want to hear the full history of La Llorona, or if you guys want to hear the story of more military people dealing with the paranormal, I would love to create those videos for you guys. So that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope that you have a good rest of your day. Stay safe, stay loved, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace.